Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. I finally got a chance to watch the trailer for the new Avengers Endgame movie, and I wanted to do a reaction video to it. And if you've been around my channel, you'll know that my reaction videos are much different than everybody else's. But I wanted to do this reaction video because it provoked quite a reaction in me, quite a positive reaction, as opposed to the negative reaction which I got from the Captain Marvel trailer. But what provoked this positive reaction in me was just the first few seconds of this trailer, where you simply have Tony Stark recording his message to Pepper Potts on what he thinks is the last day he's going to be alive. And that's what provoked the greatest reaction within me. And it's because of the story that this comes from. Now, my greatest stint of reading Iron Man was between the late 70s and the late 90s, and I never missed an issue. It was one of the few second-tier comics that I always bought. I always bought Iron Man, I always bought Thor, I always bought Fantastic Four. Not everybody would buy those. But I was there from the time when he had his second incarnation of his armor. That was the original red and gold. And I watched Tony Stark trying to be a hero and failing. I watched Tony Stark becoming a drunk and losing everything. I watched Tony Stark wallow in self-pity and just throw away the suit of armor. I watched Tony Stark sober himself up and try to get back everything that he had lost. I watched Tony Stark get angry at the world for what they had done with his technology and go on a rampage to just extract it from everywhere. I watched Tony Stark again trying to be a hero that he originally wanted to be. And the thing is that what broke the character for me, what actually broke that line of great stories for me, was the storyline, I do believe it was in the mid to late 90s, where Tony Stark had to have this operation, and in order to do so, they had to shut down his body. So what they did was they took his mind and they downloaded it onto a computer, and then they did the surgery, and then they uploaded his mind back into his brain. And as that was happening, he, from the computer, took charge of reprogramming his own brain. And that's what really stopped me from reading Iron Man. Now, again, I still bought them and I still read them, but they weren't the same. They weren't the same great stories. Because the difference between that last story and all the other stories is that all those other stories concentrated on Tony Stark, the man that filled out that suit of armor. That's what it concentrated on. He was the man behind the hero, and you had to tell your story with that man. Whereas that last story, it's all about the science fiction. It's all about the fantasy. It's very little about the man. And it sort of erases even the very basic nature of man. And that's what broke that character for me. And there was this thing. It came out in one of the magazines that Marvel had put out in the 90s, because they did a couple of magazines where they were magazines that looked like they should be in the Marvel universe. Everything in them looked like it was in the Marvel universe. So you had, advertisements where Thor was selling, razor blades, and you had a 2-page spread that was a branding, a sort of lifestyle branding for Stark Enterprises. So down in the corner, you had your little Stark Enterprises logo, and then you had this beautiful picture of Iron Man. It was a beautiful John Romita Jr. picture in a beautiful John Romita Jr. pose of Iron Man that only he can do, and it was a picture of Iron Man taking off. And behind the picture of Iron Man, you had this statement. It said, "Without the man on the inside, it's just an empty shell." And that's what Iron Man is about. It's about him. It's about Tony Stark. It's about that man who fills out that suit of armor and makes that hero. That's what the story should be about. And that's what this movie looks like it's about. And that's what I would say all of the Iron Man appearances in the movies have been about. It's been about the man. And this is what I want to see the movie for. What tugged at me wasn't the fact that they're going to defeat Thanos. It wasn't the fact that they had to come up with this plan and execute it. It wasn't the fact that they had to rebuild the Avengers. It wasn't the fact that half of the life in the entire universe was eradicated and they had to redress this. It was simply Tony Stark leaving his message for Pepper Potts on the day he believes he's going to die. That's human. That's Tony Stark being triumphantly human. and being okay with the fact he's going to die and he's thinking about the woman that he loves. Because one of the things about Tony Stark in the comics is that he was always a philanderer, and he just had trouble controlling his ego all the time. And that last story that I talked about that broke the character for me, where he rewrote his own brain, that was a story where his ego just won out. In my estimation, that's what happened in that story. His ego just won out. But here, in this new story, in this movie, you see him being triumphantly human. And that's what makes the hero for this character. That's what makes Iron Man a hero. And the reason why I wanted to do all that little backstory that I just talked about was because this is what Marvel needs. These actual stories in the movies are what we want, I would say. Certainly all of these stories are from the 80s and 90s, most of them anyways. These great stories that they're retelling in these movies, they've been from that era. And this is a continuation of that era. These are stories, this is where the characters evolve from those great stories and become something even better. And it's becoming something even better before they die. And I think that's what's going to happen. I really do. And I actually hope that that's what happens. I hope they don't try to replace any of the characters with different actors, because it made them human. The fact that these actors are the ones that have to play these characters in the minds of people is what makes them so human, because you can see the actors getting older. You can see the actors getting tired of playing these parts. And you know that sooner or later, these actors are going to have to leave. And what that should entail is the death of these characters. And if you took that original great storyline from the 80s and 90s and put this as the end of those stories, the death of these characters through these movies, I would be okay with that. That would be the death of these characters, and it would be a noble death, having Tony Stark being triumphantly human. And that's what makes him a hero. That is a noble death for that character. Because in the comics, if you've been reading the comics for even the last 15 years, I would say, these characters are becoming less and less of a hero every day. They're not heroes anymore. And there's plenty of reasons for that. I would say the reason right now, the most significant reason, is because you have people pushing their agenda and they're just using these characters as a mask to push their ideas. Prior to that, you had the constant reboots. You had what I would call the one more day syndrome, where everybody just wanted to bring it back to that time that they loved, and that was it. You know, that's what broke things in that time, just trying to reboot it too much. And prior to that, again, I think it was just the concentration too much on the fantasy and not enough on the human characters. And so if these characters were to die now, if this was to be the end of these characters, I'd be fine with that. Because in the comics, again, those characters are dead now. I mean, they're not there. They're still alive, but there is no man on the inside. Like that little Stark Enterprises advertisement that said, without the man on the inside, it's just an empty shell. Those characters in the comics now, they're just empty shells. And Marvel always went on about the fact that they are the world outside your window, and they're still the world outside your window. But really, it doesn't matter anymore. Marvel Universe in the comics is still possibly the world outside your window, but it's populated by non-player characters. They're simply not human. They're not human at all. And that's what kills all of these stories. There is nothing really human within these characters. There's no fundamental thing that you can grasp on and relate to as a human being to make you feel like a superhero. And like I said, if that means that these characters are going to have their last hurrah in the movies because they're continuing on from these great stories when comics were great, and this is their last hurrah, and they're going to die off after that, certainly in the minds of the people who love these characters, well, I think that's a noble death for these heroes. I really do. And not just for Tony Stark, but for the rest of them as well. Their noble death of being triumphantly human in order to fulfill the fact that they wish to be heroes. So, I just wanted to do this short video and say that. If I gave you anything new to think about, hit like. Hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me whether or not you think this would be a noble death for these heroes, and if it should be the noble death of these heroes. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.